I'm not sure if you've noticed it or not, but there's been a real hype in motorsports in the United States recently.
Drivers! Start your engines!
Now don't get me wrong, many of us love NASCAR and bike racing, but I'm not sure if it's Netflix's Drive to Survive series or just the fact that more races are being held in the country, but motorsports have really taken off in the United States, and I couldn't be more excited. As a fan of Formula One racing, I understand why many of us love motorsports.
It's one of the most fun conditions to drive in, and if you're one of those drivers who are just comfortable in the car, you can make so much difference.
The thrill of seeing people racing at top speeds and risking it all on the track can be exhilarating. But as you could imagine, motorsports have also given us some truly crazy moments in the past. Today, we'll be running down some of those most insane motorsports moments of all time, which will truly make your jaw drop open. Track Invader. To kick things off, we'll be looking at a situation that I think pretty much every sport has these days, the deadly case of the deadly invader. Whether it's basketball or soccer, we all know how it feels when the action is stopped because someone suddenly heads onto the playing arena for some reason or another. It could be to try and touch one of the players or to pass off some sort of social message, but back in 2003, a man by the name of Cornelius Horan had marked himself in Formula One lore by conducting what is probably the craziest track invasion. At the British Grand Prix in Silverstone, the drivers were already in the thick of the action when Horan suddenly jumped onto the track and caused an absolute scene. Horan, who was apparently a priest, jumped on wearing an orange kilt and a religious banner that read, "Read the Bible is always right." His invasion of the pitch was so insane that several drivers literally had to swerve just to make sure he didn't get hit. And if you know anything about turning in Formula One, you'd know that that's no small feat. He would eventually be tackled by a track marshal and removed, and after which he was arrested and charged with aggravated trespassing. Horan served 2 months in jail for this, and while you think that would be it, you would be wrong, because in fact Horan has a history of staging his religious protests at some major events. He was back at it in 2004 at the Epsom Derby, and again at the 2004 Summer Olympics men's marathon. Look, now I understand the fact that religious people want to spread their message of the gospel, but risking your life and the safety of others, is that really the best way to do it? I don't think so. Flipping insane. Now look, if we were all honest with each other, we'd admit that the crashes in Formula One, along with other motorsports, are part of why it's so popular. The entire thrill of seeing a car move at high speeds is insane, but like everything that has to do with speed, it's the crashes that are always a possibility. And while many organizations that handle these events try their best to ensure that drivers are safe, it's not always the case. Take the situation at F3 in Monza back in 2019. Alex Peroni, an Australian driver who was competing for the Toro Rosso team, was having a pretty good day on the track. He was looking to grab the podium, but that good day would suddenly turn dark when Peroni miscalculated a turn and then hit a curb.
I think we now can show you what happened to Alex Peroni. Oh my goodness me. That is a horrific sight.
According to reports, he had hit that curb while traveling at the gobsmacking pace of about 150 miles per hour. That sort of collision would normally be enough to kill anyone who was traveling in a regular old car. So you can imagine the type of damage that it did to this one. His car went flying and landed upside down on a Halo cockpit protection device, but even the device was unable to stop it from splintering. Interestingly, Peroni was actually able to walk away from this one unharmed.
And Alex Peroni is out of the car. Dr. Ian Roberts with him there. And that is so good to see.
The Toro Rosso team confirmed that he did suffer a broken vertebrae as a result of the crash, but he was immediately taken to a hospital and given the best care possible. Today, he actually still drives, He's no longer with the Formula One organization, though he now competes in the GT World Challenge Europe Endurance Cup. Jet dryer incident. Speaking of insane accidents, we now take a quick break from the crazy world of Formula One to look at the Daytona 500. It might not be the most popular race in the world, but the Daytona 500 is a huge event in the United States, and Americans tend to love it because it's a more raw and loose form of car racing, not necessarily the posh stuff that you see in F1. For a perfect example of this rawness, we'll head back to 2012, when one of the craziest moments in the history of the sport actually took place. After qualifying in 35th place for the Great American Race, Colombian legendary driver Juan Pablo Montoya headed into the season-opening race at the Daytona 500 with a mission. That was to win it all. He began the race blazing hot, but at lap 160, disaster would strike. He and his red number 42 vehicle were moving around the track to catch up with the rest of the field when this took place.
They're trying to clear debris off the racetrack, and the car brakes, won't steer, and he slides up the track and into the back of that surplus helicopter jet engine on a trailer used to drive.
Montoya apparently lost control of his brakes and slammed right into the jet rider in front of him. With a collision that intense, the jet rider was immediately set ablaze, and before you know it, the entire motorsports world had an incident on its hands. He had apparently suffered a suspension failure with his car, having not been serviced correctly, but fortunately for everyone, both he and the driver of the jet rider would be rescued and medically cleared. Venting frustrations. If there's one common trend amongst motorsport drivers, it's the desire to win at all costs. These men are competitive beasts, and they let their competitiveness show at every turn. When things don't go so well for them, it can understandably become really frustrating. Back at the AAA Texas 500 in 2011, an interesting event took place after Jeff Gordon and Jeff Burton, two of the most well-respected drivers in the garage at the time, apparently had a little bit of a collision on lap 191.
Ahead for the garage. So our seventh caution. Oh no, and Jeff Gordon. Where in the world?
Bring it to me.
He's over at the exit of turn 2, and Jeff Burton involved.
Considering the extent of their crash, it was obvious the race was over for both of them. But Gordon wasn't really happy with what had happened, and he made sure to let Burton know about it in a really crude manner.
And they're going to go and talk it out here. Oh, and this is... Well, we've got a fight breaking out.
Yeah, Jeff's not happy. Jeff Gordon not happy with what happened there.
The fight didn't last so long, and both of the Jeffs were quickly separated by race safety officials. Still, though, considering both men were kind of known for being calm around the garage, you'd understand how this one looked quite strange. High slide effect. MotoGP is another sport where it's beyond important to be careful. I mean, we all know how it is. If you're riding a bike on your own, you've got to be incredibly cautious. Then imagine what it's like riding in the midst of so many other guys. Yikes! Well, at the Australian Grand Prix in 2019, we saw a perfect example of why this sport is one of the most dangerous in the world. Just as the race was about to begin, the experienced Danilo Petrucci apparently suffered a high slide, taking out the rookie Fabio Quartararo with him. Apparently, it was not necessarily Petrucci's fault. He just so happened to collide with a separate driver and lost control of his bike, and the rookie just so happened to be beside him at the time and got some of the fallout as well. Fortunately, both of them ended up completely fine, and the race was able to go on. Webber on the wall. Speaking of brutal disasters, it would be impossible to talk about the craziest motorsports moments without mentioning the insane crash that took place at the 2010 European Grand Prix. Here, Mark Webber, an Australian driver who had already made a bit of a name for himself, suffered what was to no doubt be a life-threatening accident after colliding with the rear tires of Heikki Kovalainen. Webber was already having a pretty bad day because he dropped from P2 to P18 in the race, and as he tried to revive his race on lap 10 by overtaking Kovalainen, his front left tires clipped the back right tires of his opponent, sending him flying straight into the wall. The crash was just insane. Webber's car landed on its nose at a speed of 190 miles an hour, and then he wasn't hurt, but his vehicle was an absolute write-off after the event, which, of course, is no surprise. Stunt gone wrong. If there's one motorsport game I'm sure I could never compete in, it would be motocross. Like I said earlier, having to ride a bike already is pretty dangerous, but when you throw in the uneven terrain and the fact that you're riding in the company of several other jacked-up alpha bros, this danger just intensifies. The crazy thing about motocross is always the stunts, and while they're pretty cool when done correctly, poor execution could lead to some serious consequences. Just ask this guy, for example.
Oh, Forkner! Forkner throws it away! I cannot believe it!
Apparently, the guy in the clip was about to complete a jump and wanted to do a little twist for the cameras, but things didn't quite go as planned, and he ended up with a face full of dirt instead.
Watch, just touches the front wheel, and we've seen that so many times because it's almost like a slight...
Now, I'm not really sure if it's just me, but I feel like it might be better for him to stick with the easy stuff. You sure don't want to get pummeled again, do you? Terrible detour. With Formula One, a major part of success is knowing how to control your car. Drivers have to deal with so many twists and turns, and if you're not careful, you could be in for a pretty wild ride. At the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix, Roman Grosjean, a driver for the Haas F1 team, had a nasty crash that definitely sent a chill down the spine of F1 fans all over the world. After unsuccessfully trying to work a turn, he was sent into the wall in the most horrifying way possible.
Ready as they file their way through, and Lance Stroll going off the track.
The crash ended up being a pretty gnarly one, and with the safety team spending a bit of time before they got there, things could have really turned out a whole lot worse. Fortunately, though, he was able to unbuckle himself from his car and get out of the fireball just in time. That was a close one. The double whammy. You see, when it comes to motocross, there are just so many things that drivers have to worry about. You need to ensure that your bike works well, that the terrain favors you, and that the other drivers also don't have it in for you. Sometimes, all of the forces in the game just collude together to pretty much bring you down. Check out, for instance, what happened to this guy. Now you may be thinking that being bit so hard by the ground would be bad enough, but watch what takes place next.
And he's down. Oh, and Shimoda gets into him and goes down.
Apart from the fact that he got hit by the floor, the guy got whacked by his opponent for good measure. Now I know that the other guy didn't mean to do that on purpose, but sometimes our intentions don't really matter. The guy who got whacked was fortunately okay, and he was immediately pulled from the race. Messy cluster. Remember when I told you that there are so many things that could easily work against you when it comes to motorsports? Well, I don't think there's any example that better illustrates my point than this one here. This is one of those situations where it's just impossible to decipher who was wrong or who had caused the accident, but one thing is for sure, other drivers ended up being collateral damage. And just imagine how messy the whole thing ended up being when the drivers had to go back and get their bikes from the cluster. Everyone's running frantically, nobody wants to cooperate, so good luck with that one, because they're all gonna need it. Over the top. The Indianapolis 500 is another race that I personally feel is pretty underrated. It's quite similar to Formula One, but there are some major differences, especially with the vehicles. Considering that the Indy 500 cars don't have so many aerodynamics and are generally more sleek, you can imagine that the margin of error when it comes to collisions is incredibly small. Take this situation for instance. At the 2017 Indy 500, Scott Dixon and Jay Howard had a pretty nasty crash that kind of left everybody shell-shocked. Apparently, Howard had been moving too fast, and Dixon hit an abrupt stop. With nowhere else to run, Howard went straight into Dixon, and the angle of collision sent him flying into the wall. Fortunately for everyone involved, race officials were quick to get onto the scene before things turned ugly, and both Howard and Dixon were able to get off the track without needing any assistance. No matter who was responsible for this one, we can all agree that it was nothing short of a miracle. Finishing no matter what. When it comes to car racing, one thing that matters to every driver is finishing the race in a good position. And for Formula One, it's a well-known fact that you don't necessarily have to finish in first place every time to score points. As long as you finish in the top 10, you'll at least get something to take home. In 1993, we saw one driver show immense grit to finish a race, even after his car had been absolutely wrecked. At the Belgian Grand Prix, the race was going pretty much without a hitch, with legendary driver Damon Hill crossing the checkered flag first. But as the other drivers began scrambling to make it to the finish line and hitting speeds of over 200 miles an hour, Christian Fittipaldi and Pierluigi Martini, two men on the same team no less, had a bit of a collision just outside of the finish line.
Eén keer eerder stond hij dit jaar op het podium. Het gebeurde in Monaco. Hier nogmaals op het moment met de beide... Oh, ze rijden gewoon tegen elkaar aan. Goedemorgen zeg hé. Holy mikmak, die hadden we.
The two men were already at the finish line, but for some reason, Fittipaldi tried to overtake his teammate. One thing would lead to another, and both men crashed. Despite his car spinning 360 degrees and crashing down, Fittipaldi still managed to get across the line.
Een absolute salto van Christian Fittipaldi.
Both men didn't get any points, but still, I guess it's a great job in the end. Piggyback ride. Well, whenever a crash happens in any motorsport, there's always a little bit of controversy. Things like who caused it, was there malicious intent, what could have been done to prevent it, but most of the time these arguments are made by teams involved. In this next clip, we see something pretty different. A man crashes into an opponent at a MotoGP race, and that opponent decided if he was going to go down, they were going to go down together. As you can imagine, the guy, still with his bike, was not too happy with the whole thing, and instead of just allowing the bikeless guy to get off and continue his race, he decided to let him have a piece of his mind. As you can imagine, it didn't go down well with anybody. Tensions flaring everywhere, both drivers losing position, and it's just a sad sight to see, to be honest. The championship-changing melee. At this point, I think it's safe to say that crashes have become a pretty normal thing in Formula One, but even at that, not many crashes have managed to have so many people being involved as the one that happened at the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix. Literally at the first turn of the race, Mercedes Valtteri Bottas broke too late, ramming into the back of Lando Norris.
And Hungarian Grand Prix is underway. Who is going to get off the start fastest? Max Verstappen into the middle of the track, but Lando Norris on the inside alongside Bottas. He's taken the position, and a Red Bull up into P2 behind Lewis Hamilton, who holds on to the lead as they're 10 to down in touch. Woo, we've got cars.
The crash immediately took out Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, meaning that 4 men were already derailed, but that wasn't all. At that same time, Aston Martin's Lance Stroll had made a mistake, colliding with Ferrari's Charles Leclerc.
There are 5 cars, 6 cars, and more contact there between the Ferrari and the second McLaren.
Just like that, 7 cars, out of a possible 15, were already affected at the beginning of the race. It's a pretty interesting thing. Normally you'd see 1 or 2 cars caught in a scuffle, but 7, that's just intense. Split-second fireball. Every vehicle needs fuel, we all know that. And when you have to change the fuel in your vehicle in the middle of a race, you can imagine how much it's going to slow you down. This is why many racing teams today do their best to optimize their fuel-changing operations in order to be as quick as possible. But despite all of the training, mistakes do happen from time to time. Back in the Hockenheim race of 1994, Jos Verstappen, yes, the father of Max Verstappen, made a quick pit stop as he tried to refuel. But what was supposed to be a regular pit stop soon turned out to be a nightmare when fuel was sprayed all over his car.
There goes the fuel hose. A little bit of a problem. Is that fuel splashing? Horrific.
Greatest fear of everyone up and down the pit lane, the mechanic.
In a second, his car would be completely engulfed in flames. Apparently, his engine was just too hot, and that ignited the fire as the fuel spilled all over it.
The fuel just splashed around the fueling nozzle, and you can see the reaction there from the team. There is Flavio Briatore walking around the car in dismay. The car stuck in gear. Jos Verstappen thankfully out of the car. But look towards the garage, still a lot of confusion going on around the Benetton pits.
Thankfully, he was able to escape, and that ended up being that. Motorsports are undoubtedly thrilling, and with unforgettable moments like these taking place, you can bet these sports will always be there to entertain us. What do you think, though? Which of these situations was the most interesting to see? Let me know all about it in the comments section down below. Check out the other cool things that are showing up on the screen, and I will see you next time.